I want to tell a story, a dating story. But it's not my personal dating story. It's a story that I read as a child. And it was read to me. And then I even watched that story on TV. It was a cartoon movie for children. It was a fairy tale by Andersen about Thumbelina. You know, can you imagine when a child listens to that story for the first time? It's a thriller. It's a horror movie. Because that little beautiful girl, and every girl identifies herself so easily with Thumbelina. As a Thumbelina, I was facing these horrible, horrible choices. The first choice of a date was this ugly, huge, fearful toad. What do you call them? A toad and a frog. It was terrible. I was terrified when I was listening to that part of the story. And her next adventure was a beetle. A beetle who saved her from the frog. He was not as ugly as the frog. He was almost her size, so you would think it's a match, because he took her lightly in his paws or hands, and she felt so elevated. He took her onto a beautiful tree and expressed his appreciation and his love for her. This was something that Thumbelina really needed at that moment. And then, unfortunately, when he introduced her to his relatives, to his family, they didn't like her. They said, she is not like us. She even doesn't have a moustache. I remember as a child, I was witnessing that part of the story, and I felt it was so unfair. Thumbelina shouldn't have any moustache. She was a fine little girl. She should not have been judged for not having a moustache. And her next adventure was even worse. She was living in that big forest. There were not any more fiancés hunting for her. She was all alone. She was enjoying some nice summer days, friendly atmosphere and surroundings in the forest. She managed to make herself a nice bed. It was like a hammock. And she had a beautiful, flower on top of her. There was enough food for her. Unfortunately, the summer was over and it was getting really cold. And she had to struggle. She started starving. There wasn't enough food. She was looking for bits and pieces of grain and wheat in the big field. And she came across a mouse or a rat. You would think it was a good luck for her, because when the old rat invited her to live with her, I was happy for her because there was a shelter, there was food, she was warm. Unfortunately, there was a new disaster looming over Thumbelina. There was this, a badger. He was old and huge, and he was blind. And the rat was telling Thumbelina that that was her only choice, and that she had to be happy. There was one more experience, or one more episode before that happened. When Thumbelina was walking outside, she found a swallow. A swallow was frozen. I think she was frozen, And Thumbelina was taking care of the swallow for some time. The badge and the rat thought that the swallow was dead, but Thumbelina kept looking after the bird, and the bird recovered. Thumbelina managed, by her love and by her, caring after that bird, actually bring that bird back to life. And when the rat and the badge decided on the wedding, where Thumbelina had to marry the badge, Thumbelina said, "May I go out and have a look, the last look at the sun?" And they said, "Yes, you may, go." So she went out, and Swallow, who was already healthy and strong, saw Thumbelina. She was going to fly to the faraway countries, and she said, "Why don't you fly with me? I'll take you to that very, very faraway country. Here it's winter, but in that country it's warm, and it's wonderful all the time." And Thumbelina, did she have a choice? No, she didn't. She climbed up the swallow, and they flew to that faraway country. And there she met the love of her life, Elf, a prince. He was the same size as her. He looked like her a little bit, but he had nice, beautiful wings. And there were a lot of other elves around like him, and they presented Thumbelina with a pair of wings, and they lived happily ever after in that kingdom of elves, in that beautiful faraway country. I was so happy for Thumbelina. However, if I had a chance to talk to Andersen, I would ask him to make that part of the story where she meets the love of her life, to make that part of the story bigger. Because a lot of children, like myself, they read this story and they're so thrilled by the adventures of Thumbelina that story repeats itself in the lives of the girls that read that story. However, it's not what I was going to tell about. It was my experience when I read this story to my children when they were 4 and 6 years old. I was reading to them Thumbelina, one of my favorite fairy tales, and my children, we were sitting in the kitchen, and my children cried. First they were sniffing their noses, and then they were rubbing their little eyes, and then their pretty faces were cringing, and they were so sad and so upset, and after a short while they were sobbing. They were crying aloud, and they took the towel and they were wiping their tears. They were crying. They were sorry for Thumbelina. Just as I was sorry myself when I was listening to it for the first time. However, I can't remember myself crying. I was terrified, but I wasn't so much sorry for her. Yes. And then years after, when my children were, let's say, 18, 20 years old, we were sitting in the kitchen, and I was reading that story to them again, just for fun. And all of a sudden I started crying. I was so sorry for Thumbelina. And then my children laughed. And they said, "Mom, it's just a fairy tale. How you can cry on it?" That's the story of my dating. That's the story of my dating, which is not really my story. But somehow it relates to me. Somehow this story has seen generations of different reactions to it. From me, my children, and then again from me. Thank you.